is team what?
106.
And 112 is pro, right? Smile nice for the camera.
Right? Okay. Ready, everybody? Okay. Resolved. The benefits of the United States federal government's use of offensive cyber operations outweigh the harms. When considering cyber operations, especially offensive ones, most assume that the user will be safer or better off. However, a United States that is more powerful in cyberspace does not necessarily mean that it is more secure. My partner and I strongly negate today's resolution and believe that the benefits of offensive cyber operations do not outweigh the harms. But we believe this to be true because using offensive cyber operations create unnecessary vulnerabilities and complexities. They are not always effective, and they lead to unintended consequences. Before we begin, we'd like to define cyber operations as operations to manipulate, deny, disrupt, degrade, or destroy targeted computers, information systems, or networks, and the word offensive in this context means actively aggressive or attacking. Contention 1. The use of offensive cyber operations creates unnecessary vulnerabilities and complexities. The main difficulty concerning cyber operations is that cyberspace is a virtual construct. If you get attacked, it can be nearly impossible to pinpoint the attacker's location. Due to how the cyber world operates, attackers can have Wi-Fi networks and use a variety of routers from around the globe, and the devices used for the attack are oftentimes disposable. If you knew where the computer was, it would give you a good idea of who your attacker was. But considering that cyberspace can be very misleading, it often leaves you as an idiotic opponent. The Hill explains that monitoring something physical, such as nuclear weapons, is less complex than knowing about another country's cyber capabilities. With all these complexities come more vulnerabilities. The more that the United States is involved with cyber operations, the more chances there are for errors, viruses, and attacks. Contention 2. The benefits of an offensive posture, especially in cyberspace, are mostly misleading today. The old saying, the best defense is a good offense, is severely flawed. Most military and strategic theory states that being on the defensive is actually the superior posture. Additionally, Cato explains that fear, suspicion, and misperception that characterize interstate rivalries intensify the risk of offensive action in cyberspace. In fact, the cyber world is optimized for defense and deception and not offensive maneuvers. The stronger form of war is in deception-driven defense, confusing an attacker so they waste resources attacking a strong point that we make them think that's weak. So this would be much more beneficial for us. Additionally, our third contention is that for the United States, being on the offensive could potentially deter some cyber attacks, but the outcome of these operations could have unintended consequences. For example, the Hill explains that hacking into a power plant in Russia, so it can be shut off if conflict arises between the two countries, may appear to be an effective deterrent, but deployment may cause collateral damage and impact blameless civilians. In addition, infiltrating another country's infrastructure could prompt them to do the same to us. Other consequences include software malfunctions that interfere with reliable communication and potential hackers that could trigger attacks and viruses. Because of this, the United States needs to seriously consider the potential backfire that comes from cyber operations. Additionally, these cyber attacks take place rapidly, meaning decision makers might not have much time to plan. Fred Kaplan from Slate explains how cyberspace is now seen by officials as just another domain of warfare. But there's something different and much more dangerous about this domain, and that it takes place out of sight, and a lot of these operations are so highly classified that only a few people know what's going on. And this creates an inherently hair-trigger situation, which could unleash war at lightning speed with little to no warning. And it is for the reasons that these operations create needless weaknesses and complexities, they're not always effective, and they lead to inadvertent consequences that my partner and I strongly encourage a con ballot today. Thank you.
Just give me a second to get a timer. Okay.
Resolved. Benefits of the United States federal government's use of offensive cyber operations outweigh the harms. My partner and I support the resolution for the following reasons. Offensive cyber operations prevent harmful cyber attacks by other countries. Defensive strategies are not as beneficial as offensive operations, and maintaining a constant state of action keeps the country advancing in cyber warfare. Argument 1. Going on the offense for cyber operations prevents cyber attacks by other countries. Unlike in situations where the U.S. has been hacked by other countries and not known how to deal with it, an offensive approach makes them prepared. For example, this past summer on June 13th, the U.S. was able to use an offensive strategy to target an important Iranian database, used by Iran's paramilitary arm to plot attacks against oil tankers and degraded Tehran's ability to covertly target shipping traffic in the Persian Gulf, at least temporarily, according to Julian A. Barnes in the article, U.S. Cyber Attack Hurt Iran's Ability to Target Oil Tankers, officials say. If the United States continues to use strategies such as this one in cyber warfare, the benefits would certainly outweigh the harms. Offensive strategies make it much easier for the U.S. to prevent cyber attacks. Argument 2. Defensive operations are not as beneficial as offensive operations. The U.S. has had a deterrent strategy when it comes to cyber warfare in the past. According to an article called How the U.S. Can Play Cyber Offense by Michael Solmeyer, director of the Cybersecurity Project at Harvard Kennedy School's Belfair Center, deterrence aims to change the calculations of adversities by persuading them that the risks of an attack outweigh the rewards or that they will be denied the benefits they seek. However, with this deterrence strategy, the United States has been attacked many times by Russia in the 2016 midterm presidential elections, and even Chinese hacking groups to steal property of U.S. industrial manufacturers. This can all be contributed to the strategy the government had on cyber operations. Offensive cyber operations could have prevented these events. Argument 3. If the government stays in a constant state of action, seeking the offense, it will remain advanced in cyber warfare. In an interview with Paul M. Nakasone, commander of the United States Cyber Command, he states, talking about the country's adversaries, they are actively in our network communications, attempting to steal data and impact our weapons systems. So advantage is gained by those who maintain a continual state of action. When it comes to cyber warfare, hackers are within the networks years before an attack occurs. Deterrence isn't effective for the reality of the cyber world. If the U.S. continues to actively seek out ways to advance in cyber warfare, it will stay prepared for the attacks. In conclusion, my partner and I support the resolution for the following 3 reasons. An offensive approach to cyber warfare can partially or completely prevent cyber attacks by other countries. Defensive strategies, such as deterrence, are not as beneficial as offensive strategies, and maintaining a constant state of action keeps the country advancing in cyber warfare. For these reasons, my partner and I strongly encourage a ballot.
So I'd first like to start off by asking you what you meant by when you said that the United States needs to stay prepared.
Stay prepared for the attacks that could be posed by other countries.
In what way would we be prepared by cyber or offensive cyber?
Well, we would already, because for offensive cyber attacks, you're already in the system years before, so by being in their systems, we could be prepared for attacks they could pose on us. I do believe you talked about the harm that cyber attacks could cause. Well, personally, my partner and I do believe that regular attacks do cause more harm than the harm caused by cyber attacks. So cyber attacks are more beneficial, and well, they are beneficial, and they do.
What was your question?
That was just really.
Okay, that's fine. So another question that I have for you is you talked about the case in Iran and how offensive cyber operations were beneficial there, and then you also talked about how Russia kind of meddled in the election process, and you claimed that these things could have been prevented by the use of offensive cyber agents. Can you please explain how that would work?
As I later went in with deterrence, these strategies, they weren't working, and as answering your question before, I said that we could stay prepared if we weren't in the systems before. If we had been using offensive strategies before this, we could have prevented that from happening.
Right. And do you also think that a stronger defensive strategy also would be more beneficial than strategy?
We do believe that defense is important, but offense can create a good defense in itself.
Do you have any more questions? I have one more. So in your first contention, you're talking about how offensive cyber operations are used to prevent harm from happening. But don't you agree that when we attack another country, we're actually leaving ourselves vulnerable to more attacks?
Well, I think that either way we have to attack in some way, and cyber warfare is causes much less harm than other ways.
Thank you.
So when we consider the world of cyber, we have found that it's extremely complex. Somebody could be coming from a cyber cafe in several hundred different countries. They could be hijacking a Wi-Fi connection, and so therefore it won't be too long that pretty soon we can just conduct cyber attacks using a cell phone. And for most of the world's countries, cell phones aren't connected to individuals, therefore making it next to impossible to even pinpoint your attacker. Additionally, my partner and I found that conflicts in cyberspace are so unlike clashes in the real world that the military must think differently about strategic cyber warfare than they would conventional war. And Martin Lebecki, a senior management scientist, explains that the primary purpose of fighting is to disarm the other side. But when you apply that analogy in cyberspace, it honestly just falls apart. It is very difficult to disarm another nation's ability to use hackers in cyberspace, and you almost certainly can't do it with the hackers themselves. And he's speaking of strategy because cyber attacks will be unlikely to cause significant damage to the enemy, as does conventional warfare. One of the differences between cyber and other forms of warfare is that cyber is largely untested. Also known there's a ton of unknowns with it, making it more of a harm than a benefit. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Additionally, cyber operations to date, they may not have been escalatory, but they also haven't been particularly effective. Recent policy changes and strategy pronouncements actually increase the risk of escalation while doing nothing to make cyber operations more effective. These changes revolve around a dangerous myth that offense is an effective and easy way to stop rival states from hacking America. The United States should focus on protective measures to make the U.S. systems less vulnerable and on sharing intelligence with allies and partners. A policy of restraint that maintains control over the weapons of cyber war is strategically wise. Not only is offense likely the weaker form of competition in cyberspace, it also risks inadvertent escalation. The fear, suspicion, and misperception that characterize interstate rivalries increases the risk of offensive action in cyberspace. Lastly, my partner and I have found that infiltrating another country's critical infrastructure could prompt our adversaries to infiltrate our critical infrastructure. Alternatively, when we are comparing or explaining using attacks on Russians' nuclear deployment systems, what would happen if they were to respond? Are U.S. organizations, private entities, caught in the crossfire and losing their vulnerable data because of their government's actions? The U.S. needs to seriously reconsider and evaluate the potential blowback from offensive decisions in cyberspace, which is something they have been failing to do. Lastly, cyber war or software malfunctions might interfere with reliable communication. They also might take place more rapidly than decision makers could interpret the results and or resolve upon an appropriate response. Third, the identity of a cyber attacker might remain unclear for the duration of the crisis. Indeed, a third party could impersonate an American or Russian communication or create an information embolism in either state's networks. In an extreme case, a state-directed hacker or individual malware might trigger an incorrect attack warning or trigger an inauthentic launch command. As my partner and I have thoroughly proven, today's resolution is false due to the fact that the use of offensive cyber operations opens the door to countless complexities and vulnerabilities, and the benefits have not been proven and they're not always effective. And lastly, it leads to unintended consequences which we have no way to pinpoint the results of. For these reasons, my partner and I strongly urge a con ballot.
Resolved, the benefits of the United States federal government's use of offensive cyber operations outweigh the harms. My partner and I agree with this resolution because of the three facts that the U.S. cyber offensives help ensure national security, cyber warfare can save lives, and we have to adapt to this new type of warfare. Contention 1. U.S. cyber offensives help ensure national security. The U.S. Director of National Security, who is also the U.S. Cyber Commander, stated that over the last decade, U.S. responses to foreign cyber attacks have been tenuous, they have been episodic, and that we really haven't done anything. And that from now on, we are going to ensure that our adversaries know that there are limits within which they can operate. No longer are we going to be on the sidelines. If we continue to let foreign entities walk all over us, then we can expect to become a weaker nation. No longer using this new type of warfare would be akin to dismantling all of our armed forces. If we are not willing to adapt to this new form of cyber offensive, then we will face the consequences. Convention 2. Cyber warfare can save lives. According to the foreignpolicy.com, the Stuxnet virus was a virus that infected systems that altered code in a way that made it too risky to run centrifuges in Iranian nuclear facilities. The pushback Iranian development by several months, or some experts believe, several years. This particular cyber attack saved lives rather than cost them. A similar situation saw Israel wanting the U.S. to drop bombs on a Syrian nuclear facility. Instead, President Bush decided to offer an diplomatic approach. Israel took measures into their own hands. Former Vice President Dick Cheney wrote, under cover of darkness on September 6, 2007, Israeli F-15s crossed the Syrian airspace and within minutes were over the target at Al-Qamar. Satellite photos afterwards show that the Israeli pilots hit their targets perfectly. Cyber attacks would make these military actions almost obsolete and drop the rate of casualties to an all-time low. Contention 3. We have to adapt to this new type of warfare. The former special assistant to the president for Homeland Security stated, as history has shown, military strategy must adapt to the new domains. Cyberspace is the next domain. While traditional warfare will continue to exist, technology and cyber attacks will aid its methods. In the same interview, the special assistant claimed that dropping cyber warfare would be similar to not using weaponized aircraft when we discovered heavier than airplane. As I said in my first contention, if we were to abandon this new form of warfare, there is no guarantee that other countries would return this courtesy. The only objective that we would complete is toppling our nation. In conclusion, U.S. cyber offenses help ensure national security, cyber warfare can save lives, and we have to adapt to this new type of warfare. For these reasons in mind, my partner and I strongly urge a pro ballot. Can you elaborate on how a good offense is not a good defense?
Yeah, so we explained in our speech that actually most military and strategic theory states that actually being on the defensive is a superior posture because you can protect your most valuable resources. And additionally, in the world of cyber, if you're on the defense, you know exactly what's in your systems, and you have complete access to it, versus when you're on the offense, you kind of send that system out and you have less access and less control over it. I would just like to ask, why are your claims seemingly different than those of your partners?
We were just adding more claims to our already existing arguments. Like adding more evidence, or adding more claims to our case.
And then you mentioned that it would cause benefits, but you also did mention that they would be temporary. So isn't there kind of a negative thing that your benefits are really temporary in the big scheme of things?
Are you saying that with these offensives, couldn't we just continue these offensives and have the have the benefits last longer?
I suppose, but if we're continuing a state of action as you state, wouldn't that actually just start depleting our resources and kind of be exhausting in the terms of the U.S. doing that constantly?
War has always been costly, and if we were to go to war with another nation for physical and technical domains, then it would be much less costly than if we were to use cyber.
I wasn't talking about costs, I was talking about just resources in general. Like if we're constantly in a state of action, wouldn't we therefore not be focusing on our defense if we're constantly attacking other people?
Why can't we have both our defense and our offense?
No, I agree, but my partner and I are just showing that the defenses should actually be the focus, and that currently we don't know enough about the offense to have it be more beneficial. If we are in an opponent's systems, as you say, that's a supposedly beneficial thing, doesn't that actually make us more vulnerable because we're in their system where they could easily attack us?
How so?
Well, if, say, we have our own software in, say, Russia's systems, and they figure it out and know about it, couldn't they just discreetly go about attacking that and actually infiltrate our systems in turn?
If we were to continue research into these cyber offensives, then we can make it so that that is relatively impossible.
Okay, so as of now, we don't really know enough yet, so it's kind of more of a harm.
That is why we need to continue research on cyber offensives, and the only way to do that is to continue our furtherment of cyber offensives.
And then if cyber warfare becomes more of the primary type of warfare, what about the underdeveloped countries that have little to no access to it?
Why would they cause war if they have no means of defending themselves?
Well, if we take war on them, it's just kind of really unfair, and war just really isn't a good thing, so it kind of, cyber warfare eliminates the need for equal playing fields.
That's a bad thing. How would cyber warfare just make it so that our adversaries are... Why does war have to be fair? If we have an adversary, should we want to take them down in the most efficient means?
I mean, I suppose, but again, like, would underdeveloped countries just never take part in war? Would we just eliminate them?
It would be very risky for them to take part in war just like it is now, except amplified through cyber warfare.
I'd like to begin this portion of the debate by briefly refuting my opponent's points before strengthening our own points and counterpoints. Our opponent's first contention is that offensive cyber operations would prevent harm from happening in our country, but again, as I've kind of stated in Crossfire, this isn't really the case because while we are attacking our countries, they are going to attack us back, leaving us vulnerable, especially like Natalie said, if we're in their systems already. And this kind of touches on one of their later points as well when they said that cyber operations will save lives because, again, like I said, that this might actually cost us lives because while we're attacking other countries, they're going to retaliate back. How they do that, we're not sure yet. And that's something else we need to point out as well because we don't know enough about cyber warfare yet, just simply because it hasn't been around for that long. And because we don't know a lot about it right now, there are too many unknowns, and these unknowns are harms in themselves, which clearly overweighs any benefit because we don't know how bad the harms are going to be. Their second contention is that cyber warfare is inherently better than other strategies, and again, we've proven that these cyber operations aren't always effective, and therefore this can't be better than other strategies if it's not effective. Additionally, their third contention says that we need to continually advance our cyber operations so, again, we can better implement these. But again, right now, what we have right now and what the United States is currently using, we don't know enough, and therefore it supports the con side. Now, to strengthen our second contention really quick is that the cyberspace is built for a defensive strategy. So we need to focus on deceiving our opponents with our defense rather than offensive. And it's for these reasons my partner and I strongly encourage a con ballot. Thank you.
I'd first like to start by refuting a few of the claims made by our opponents. Our opponents said that the use of offensive cyber operations creates unnecessary vulnerabilities and complexities. However, my partner and I believe that a good offense is a good offense. We are creating a more secure environment for cyber warfare if we are being offensive. And there are many benefits that come with it. Leading on, benefits are mostly misleading, is what they say, but we believe that the benefits that come from them are extremely good for our country and cyber warfare. A defensive strategy can be good, as said, but for us, we believe that an offensive strategy will be the most beneficial. We believe this because an offensive approach to cyber warfare can partially or completely prevent cyber attacks by other countries, as shown by the prevented attack by the Iranians. And defensive strategies, such as deterrence, are not as beneficial as offensive strategies and do not prevent as well. And maintaining a constant state of action keeps the country advancing in cyber warfare. For these reasons, my partner and I strongly encourage a pro ballot.
need a second? Okay.
I actually would first like to start off by asking you, so you talked about how we need to be in a constant state of action. What if we are in a constant state of action? Wouldn't that mean we're more predictable to operations?
Well, when it comes to the offensive cyber operations, part of the thing with that is being in the networks would be undetectable in most situations, so it would be predictable if they're not known by.
You guys talked about how through, I'm pretty sure you guys talked about how through cyber warfare, other countries would just be able to attack each other at any time. If countries were capable of doing this, would this just promote political stability because those countries wouldn't want to be attacked by other countries? Just like how in the Cold War, USSR did with America and vice versa.
But I mean, that's because they were saying they had it and nothing ever got done. Like, no offensive action was taken because they didn't want to have to deal with that. So in a sense, like, maybe we shouldn't be just immediately assuming that we need to take offensive action and instead evaluate and look at maybe take more of a defensive approach so that in the case that someone were to take offensive action on us, we're actually ready and prepared for it.
But if we were to strengthen our offensive approach, wouldn't we also be able to attack the country that had attacked us?
That is true, but you're also implying that over time in the future, and for this debate, we're talking about our offensive operations now, which as we've proven, they're like not ready to be utilized fully, and we do need to research and develop them more. So as of now, the harms of using them actually outweigh the benefits. Throughout this debate, my opponents have failed to acknowledge or even consider the extremely likely drawbacks and consequences of utilizing offensive cyber operations. Additionally, they chose to focus on the concept of improved cyber operations in the future, which just serves to prove that current offensive operations have way more harms than benefits at this time. As my partner and I have shown again and again, cyber warfare has numerous complexities which only serve to add vulnerabilities. Additionally, engaging in offensive cyber operations could lead to detrimental unplanned effects, and the current cyber operations are not always effective as we have shown. In the United States, my partner and I believe that the United States federal government's use of offensive cyber operations the benefits do not actually outweigh the harms, and for this reason, we strongly urge a con ballot. Thank you.
Good session, correct?
Yep, you bet. Okay.
War is costly. My opponent stated a lot about how cyber warfare can be harmful to civilians, and my partner and I would like to bring up the points that regular war is much more costly to keep alive. We would also like to state that the complexities of cyber warfare can be strengthened into an extremely efficient fighting force over time. Just like in every other domain of warfare, field experience is the best experience, and there is only one way to gain that. This, along with the facts that cyber offensives can affect that cyber attacks by other countries, offensive cyber operations prevent harmful cyber attacks by other countries. Defensive strategies are not as beneficial as offensive operations, and that maintaining a constant state of action keeps our country advancing in cyber warfare. My partner and I strongly urge a pro battle.
Thank you for judging.
You got